When your manager looks at you in a company-wide meeting and says, "If you're unhappy here, there's the exit." I stood up, grabbed my laptop, and left. Everyone thought I had failed. I was working on something bigger, a plan to erase their entire history. I, 28F, had been working at TechFlow Solutions for 3 years when everything changed during that company-wide meeting on a rainy Tuesday morning. The conference room was packed with about 40 employees, and I was sitting in the back row, quietly taking notes on the quarterly projections when my manager decided to make an example out of me. The meeting had been going smoothly until someone brought up concerns about the new overtime policy. I had simply raised my hand and mentioned that the policy seemed to disproportionately affect the junior developers who were already struggling with work-life balance. It was a reasonable observation, backed by data I had been collecting for weeks. That's when my manager looked directly at me with that condescending smile I had grown to despise over the months. He told the entire room that if anyone was unhappy with company policies, they knew where the exit was. The way he said it, the way he stared at me while delivering those words, made it clear this wasn't just a general statement. This was personal. The room fell silent. 40 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and anger, but something else stirred inside me, something that had been building for months of being overlooked, undermined, and dismissed despite my contributions to the company. I stood up slowly, closed my laptop with a deliberate click that echoed in the silent room, and walked toward the door. My manager called after me, asking where I thought I was going. I turned back and told him I was taking his advice about the exit. Then I walked out, leaving behind gasps and whispers. The elevator ride down felt like the longest 30 seconds of my life. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. By the time I reached the parking garage, I had already started formulating a plan that would make my manager regret ever challenging me in front of the entire company. You see, what nobody at TechFlow knew was that I had been working on something much bigger than my day job. For the past 8 months, I had been developing a comprehensive database management system that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies handled their data infrastructure. I had been doing this work entirely on my own time, using my own resources, and I had been planning to eventually leave TechFlow to start my own company anyway. But now, thanks to my manager's public humiliation, I had the perfect motivation to accelerate my timeline and add a personal touch to my business strategy. The first thing I did when I got home was call my lawyer. I needed to make sure that everything I had been working on was completely separate from my TechFlow employment. Fortunately, I had been meticulous about this from the beginning. All my code was written on personal equipment, during personal time, and addressed problems that TechFlow had never even attempted to solve. Next, I reached out to 3 key clients that I had been cultivating relationships with during my time at TechFlow. These were companies that had expressed frustration with TechFlow's limited capabilities and slow response times. I had always maintained professional boundaries, never sharing confidential information or actively poaching clients, but I had built genuine relationships with decision-makers at these companies. The first client I contacted was a growing logistics company that had been struggling with TechFlow's inability to scale their data processing needs. When I called their CTO and explained that I was now available for independent consulting, he immediately asked if we could meet that same week. The second client was a healthcare startup that had been waiting 6 months for TechFlow to deliver a custom reporting system. They had been growing increasingly frustrated with the delays and cost overruns. When I mentioned that I could deliver something better in half the time, they were very interested in hearing more. The third client was the most important one, a rapidly expanding e-commerce platform that represented nearly 30% of TechFlow's annual revenue. They had been vocal about their dissatisfaction with TechFlow's outdated approach to data management and had been quietly shopping around for alternatives. Within a week of my dramatic exit, I had secured meetings with all 3 clients. But I wasn't just offering them standard consulting services. I was offering them something that would make TechFlow completely obsolete in their operations. The system I had been developing wasn't just better than what TechFlow offered, it was revolutionary. It combined artificial intelligence, predictive analytics, and real-time processing in ways that TechFlow's legacy systems couldn't even attempt. More importantly, It was designed to be completely self-contained, meaning clients wouldn't need to rely on external vendors for ongoing support and updates. My first presentation was with the logistics company. I walked into their boardroom with a fully functional demo that processed their actual data requirements in real time. Within 20 minutes, I had shown them capabilities that TechFlow had told them were impossible with their current budget. By the end of the hour, they had signed a letter of intent for a six-figure contract. The healthcare startup meeting went even better. Not only did they immediately terminate their contract with TechFlow, but they also agreed to serve as a beta testing partner for my new system. This gave me access to real-world healthcare data challenges that would make my system even more robust. But the e-commerce platform meeting was where my revenge really began to take shape. Their CEO had always been frustrated with TechFlow's inability to provide innovative solutions. When I demonstrated how my system could increase their processing efficiency by 400% while reducing costs by 60%, he didn't just want to hire me, he wanted to invest in my company. Within 3 weeks of walking out of that meeting, I had secured enough funding and contracts to officially launch my own company. I called it Dataflow Dynamics, a name that was professional enough for enterprise clients but similar enough to TechFlow that it would definitely get my former manager's attention. The real beauty of my plan wasn't just in stealing TechFlow's clients, it was in making their entire business model obsolete. Every system I developed was designed to eliminate the need for the type of ongoing support contracts that formed the backbone of TechFlow's revenue stream. My clients wouldn't just be switching vendors, they would be switching to a completely different approach that made companies like TechFlow unnecessary. By month 2, word had started spreading through the industry. TechFlow's clients were not only leaving but were actively recommending my services to other companies. My former colleagues started reaching out, asking if I was hiring. Some of them mentioned that morale at TechFlow had plummeted since my departure, especially after several major clients terminated their contracts in the same month. The most satisfying moment came when I learned that TechFlow had lost the e-commerce platform contract, their biggest client. The CEO had specifically mentioned in his termination letter that they had found a more innovative solution that made TechFlow's services redundant. He had also mentioned that their new vendor was a former TechFlow employee who had demonstrated the kind of forward-thinking approach they had been hoping to see from TechFlow for years. But I wasn't done yet. The next phase of my plan involved something that would hit TechFlow where it really hurt, their reputation in the industry. I started speaking at industry conferences, not to badmouth TechFlow directly, but to showcase the revolutionary approaches that companies like TechFlow were failing to adopt. I presented case studies showing how traditional data management companies were holding their clients back with outdated methodologies and inflexible systems. The industry publications started taking notice. Several articles were written about the new wave of data management solutions that were making traditional vendors obsolete. TechFlow was never mentioned by name, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. 6 months after my dramatic exit, I received an unexpected call. It was from TechFlow's CEO, asking if I would be interested in discussing a potential acquisition of my company. He explained that they were looking to modernize their offerings and thought my technology could be a good fit for their existing client base. I agreed to meet with him, not because I was interested in selling, but because I wanted to see how desperate they had become. The meeting was scheduled at a neutral location, a high-end restaurant downtown. The CEO arrived looking tired and stressed. He explained that TechFlow had been struggling since several key clients had terminated their contracts. He had heard through industry contacts that I was behind some of these client departures, and he wanted to discuss how we might work together instead of competing. I listened politely as he outlined his acquisition offer. It was generous, more money than I had ever imagined making. But it wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle. I explained to him that I wasn't interested in being acquired, but I was curious about something. I asked him if he remembered the company-wide meeting where his manager had publicly humiliated me. He looked uncomfortable and admitted that he had heard about the incident but hadn't been present. I told him that his manager's behavior that day had been the catalyst for everything that followed. If I had been treated with basic professional respect, I might have eventually left TechFlow on good terms and possibly even maintained a partnership relationship. Instead, I had been motivated to build something that would make TechFlow irrelevant. The CEO apologized for his manager's behavior and asked if there was any way to repair the relationship. I told him that the damage was already done, not just to me personally, but to TechFlow's position in the market. My clients weren't just buying better technology, they were buying into a completely different philosophy about data management that made TechFlow's entire approach obsolete. As I left that meeting, I realized that my revenge was complete, but not in the way I had originally imagined. I hadn't destroyed TechFlow out of spite. I had simply built something better and let the market decide. The fact that it had devastated my former employer was just a satisfying side effect. Update 1. 3 months later, I learned that my former manager had been terminated. Apparently, the loss of several major clients had triggered an internal investigation into management practices. Several employees had come forward with complaints about his behavior, including the incident that had prompted my departure. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had told me that if I was unhappy, I knew where the exit was. Now he was the one being shown the exit. But the story doesn't end there. 2 of TechFlow's best developers reached out to me about joining Dataflow Dynamics. They explained that the company culture had become toxic after the client losses, and management was desperately trying to copy my innovations instead of developing their own. I hired both developers, not just because they were talented, but because they brought insider knowledge about TechFlow's remaining client relationships and technical limitations. This allowed me to anticipate TechFlow's moves and stay several steps ahead in the market. Update 2. A year after my dramatic exit, TechFlow Solutions was acquired by a larger consulting firm for a fraction of what they had been worth before I left. The acquisition was essentially a fire sale. The larger firm was primarily interested in TechFlow's remaining client contracts and office space. Most of TechFlow's original employees were let go during the integration process. Several of them reached out to me, and I was able to hire the best ones. My former colleagues told me that the company had never recovered from the loss of their major clients and had been struggling to compete with the new generation of data management solutions that I had pioneered. The final twist came when I learned that the manager who had humiliated me in that meeting had been trying to start his own consulting company. He had been reaching out to former TechFlow clients, trying to win back their business. However, his reputation in the industry had been damaged by the TechFlow collapse, and most potential clients were wary of working with him. Update 3. 2 years later, Dataflow Dynamics had grown to 50 employees and was being courted by venture capital firms for a major expansion round. We had completely revolutionized data management for mid-sized companies and were starting to compete with much larger enterprise solutions. I received an unexpected LinkedIn message from my former manager. He apologized for his behavior during that company meeting and asked if there might be any opportunities at Dataflow Dynamics. He explained that he had been struggling to find work since TechFlow's collapse and had learned from his mistakes. I thought about it for a long time before responding. Part of me wanted to tell him that if he was unhappy with his current situation, he knew where the exit was. But I had grown beyond petty revenge. Instead, I told him that while I appreciated his apology, Dataflow Dynamics had a strict policy about maintaining a positive and respectful workplace culture. Given our history, I didn't think it would be appropriate for him to join our team. I wished him well in his future endeavors and suggested that he might find better opportunities with companies that were more aligned with his management style. The truth was, my revenge had evolved into something much more satisfying than personal vindication. I had built something meaningful that was helping dozens of companies operate more efficiently. I had created jobs for talented people who deserved better than the toxic environment at TechFlow. And I had proven that sometimes the best response to being underestimated is to exceed everyone's expectations so dramatically that they have no choice but to take notice. That company-wide meeting where I was publicly humiliated had lasted about 2 hours. The consequences of that meeting had reshaped an entire industry segment and changed the trajectory of dozens of careers. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. It's about building something so successful that their failure becomes inevitable by comparison. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for that moment of public humiliation. It forced me to stop playing it safe and start playing to win. And in the end, everyone got exactly what they deserved.